Calling the meeting to order at 6:34. Yeah, there's quite a broadcast to our live studio audience here. Yeah,
I think that's
sure.
fine.
Yeah, as long as they can pick it up. Um, First order of business is public comment. Public comment is where we take feedback from the public on whatever matters they want to bring to us. It's a listening time for the board. So if we do not respond in real time, it does not mean that we are not seriously considering and taking the information. It's a very important part of our process, and we try to obviously we listen to everything, and we try to address the issues that we can. There is no one in the room, anyone online, and it looks like the only people online are us, Libby, and David, who I'm assuming is here for Times Argus. Consent agenda. The consent agenda is where we approve matters that usually don't need discussion, like minutes or approval of the warrants for payroll, etc. For future draft agendas. If a member of the board wants to take an item off, they can ask that it be removed and separately discussed. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Any discussion, questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? No.
Before we move on, can I add an item to the agenda?
Sure.
Which is to the board discussion part, an update to the board and community on the very informal conversations we've had so far with Washington Central about a possible merger. Yeah, so that would be the agenda item, update the board.
Perfect. We can do that after the reorg.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I'm not going to say this might be a short meeting.
Yeah, you just did. And then Tim had one small update he wanted to give from the policy committee.
Okay.
So also add that.
So reorganization of the board. It's where we don't have any new members. So congratulations to all the existing members who survived some tough competition, but we are super happy that you are willing to continue to serve. And if you haven't gotten sworn in already, please do. And if you haven't gotten sworn in, you obviously you can participate, but you are not allowed to vote. But I think well, this is make sure, since there's four of them, who's gotten sworn in, because it might.
Okay, great.
Because
4, 5, 6. We still have 6 voting.
yes,
members.
so we have 4.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought it's all 4 hadn't. I think we still would, but
yeah.
So this is where we re-choose chair, vice chair, secretary, parliamentarian, CVC representative, and choose our committee membership. Let's do the organizational positions, and then I think the plan is to kind of explain the committees, because Casey is new, and it also just, I think, just reminds the public of what these committees do. We do not have to have the same committees. I think there's been some suggestions of maybe folding a committee or 2 together, which I think we'd be very open to, especially since I know that past members of the board have stated that committee work can kind of be a backburner in terms of time and commitment. So we can discuss that later. I would like to nominate Mia Moore to be chair. The second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed?
Thanks, everyone.
Right.
Yeah. Do I get 2? I get 2 now? Well, first of all, thank you, Jim, for many, many years. as serving as the chair of the board. I've told you this personally, but I'll just say for the, the benefit of all of us and the public and on behalf of all of us, thank you very much. You have, as chair, navigated some very gnarly moments, and we really, really appreciate that leadership. So
No, thank
first
you.
of all,
And
thank you.
yeah, no, it's been a real honor to serve the community and the board in that capacity. That I've both longer than I thought, but yeah, no, but it's been more good moments than tough ones, and I've really appreciated it. Across the board, 2016, and I've been chair since 2018. So yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, and thank you for being willing to take over. I'm very excited about your leadership.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, so then we should entertain nominations for vice chair. You are certainly welcome to nominate yourself. You do not have to wait for someone to nominate. Or you can nominate your neighbor.
I mean, I would be willing to do it for another year, but I also would be happy to have someone else do it. And I am not planning to run again, so I would certainly, it would be more of a to fill in when Mia can't than any sort of plans of being chair at some point. Yes.
Taking it back.
Nominate Scott.
I think it's an opportunity to build the bench. And I recognize there are some folks that have been on the board longer than I have and have more experience. I also am happy to join me if others aren't ready for the commitment.
What was the, how do your weekly meetings occur? Do you have weekly meetings?
Usually in person, but virtual if need be. Is that what you're asking? Before?
Yeah.
And
What's the timing usually?
once a week for an hour, and we figure out the time that works best for the three people living in the chair, the vice chair.
It's during a typical workday, right? Sort of.
I think it has been recently.
Yeah,
It
I
doesn't,
think historically.
Yeah, that makes it hard.
doesn't have to be. I think the thing we'd want to avoid is an evening.
Yeah.
But I think we could do like it early.
Or if you get out, let's say like 3:30 or 4.
Yeah.
4 to 5.
Anything else yet?
I think I need a little bit more time to understand process and flow and know the dynamics of it.
Fair.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
and I'm sure there'll be both of you all the time.
I mean, I would want to talk to a lot of, a bunch of people in Roxbury about it in a way. I think there's a lot of mixed perceptions and divisions that are, or whether they're based in reality or just a matter of perception. And so I would really want to, if I were to, I wouldn't want to just assume that that would be received well. I don't know, and I would want to have support from Roxbury folk before I would do something like that. So I would currently decline, but talk to people about the possibility in the future. I'm here for 3 more years, so I don't know.
And Scott, you're also currently on first. So,
I would have to reconsider what other board, responsibilities I'm willing to take on and, the conversation that I'm having right now internally. But yes, you are right. Or, and, yeah, you are right. Jill,
I think those would be one of those people. For every
which thing?
reverse. You got nominated.
The vice chair, is that one of the things that you'd be
Yeah.
willing to consider? Yeah, I think we talked. At one point, I had, suggested that I thought you would be a good candidate, and so I would be more than happy to withdraw my whatever, if that's something that you are interested in.
Yeah.
I would be happy to know.
Yeah, and I'm gonna withdraw my whatever I did from this guy's.
With appreciation, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Well, is there a second for the nomination of Jill then?
I'll second.
Okay. Any more discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay. Congratulations, Jill, and thank you.
Too late, Jesse.
Too late. Yeah, we have closed public comment for you.
The career center is really important.
Mhm. I mean, you're welcome to, I guess we just voted, but if you
Yeah, no.
prefer to go back to the career center.
We have the other roles of secretary and parliamentarian. Is there anyone interested in either of those?
You describe those things?
Sure. The secretary is sort of the note taker, although Anna is our intrepid note taker and is the one in charge of the minutes. So the secretary is honestly does not have much. Wonderful, right? Rhett was the secretary for a little bit.
I don't know what happened. I
You're
missed it.
really good at it, right?
And the parliamentarian is someone who helps us ensure that we're running our meetings according to Robert's rules.
I remember
Jill has
correctly,
done for the last few years.
I was the unofficial vice parliamentarian last time, so I'm happy to make it official and
Oh, boy.
so I'm gonna self-nominate myself, so that's redundant.
I've got another copy. No.
I didn't know we were
Uh,
supposed to be giving gifts.
No, that's great. So we have a nomination for Scott to be parliamentarian. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, great. A tie for second. Between Jim and Jill. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Congratulations, Scott.
I've always wanted,
Got it.
I've got another copy.
All right, is there anyone who would like the nominal role of secretary?
Do we have to have one?
Well, according to our records, last year we did not. And it was actually named clerk on our document, but I think that the role is technically secretary and there was no one filling it. So,
Wasn't Kristen?
oh, maybe that's why there was no name there. Okay, that's what it is. So anyway, for about a little over half the year, we did not have one
No.
and no one noticed.
Step forward for.
Excellent.
No an obligation.
Thank you so much, Casey. I'll second that. I'll second Casey's nomination to parliament, to secretary. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, congratulations and thank you. All right, that brings us to representation on the Central Vermont Career Center Board. Scott, are you ready to step forward again?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you so
I-
much.
I literally moved my mom onto that street so I could be closer.
That's very cool. So
I'll nominate that for our select person.
thank you, Jill. Is there a second?
Second. That,
Excellent.
right?
Oh, good. Any more discussion? All right, all those in
Well,
favor?
hold on, before we, is there anyone else who's interested? Because I don't wanna like strong arm my way back onto that board.
Let's see, how often does it meet?
It's once a month. The meetings are in Barry at the career center for like half the year, and then the other half, they go around to all the sending schools. So like we had, a meeting here in Montpelier right before the break. And then there are committees, so I'm on the negotiation committee for, teachers with the union. It's renegotiated. So,
Great. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor of Scott for our rep on the CDCC board? Aye. Any opposed?
And I'm not sure, but I think, I know folks probably noticed on the ballot yesterday that where there were vacancies for, one to take out the appointees from each board, but then also nominated the public from each of the districts.
Right.
So I think there might still be, folks that might be interested in serving on it from a citizen perspective.
So Lyman,
Oh, good, okay. I
who
wrote them in.
was the at-large member from Montpelier, was moving, but then wasn't, and so
Oh.
he didn't get on the ballot, but then, so he waged a fierce write-in
Okay.
campaign.
And he
So
got enough?
I haven't looked. but-
Fingers crossed.
So I think we're good for the Montpelier.
Oh,
but
that's
yeah,
excellent.
the Harwood and the West Central, I think they were still.
Still needed someone. Got it. Well, thanks for doing that again, Scott. It's really great to have
It's been awesome.
people support, yeah. Working on that board, supporting them. Okay, let's move on to committees. I am going to share my screen in the Zoom so that we have this all up, this in front of us. I have the So the committees as they stand right now, and as Jim mentioned, there's some talk of collapsing committees together. We have negotiations, finance, policy, equity, facilities and energy. We have a net zero ad hoc committee, which is a little bit like a subcommittee of the facilities and energy committee, and the superintendent evaluation committee. So I've asked the folks who are coming in, who in the past year have been sort of the chairs of those committees, to just say a couple of words about what those committees do. So we have that context as we're thinking about which committees each of us would like to serve on. So Jim, negotiations are up. Do you mind just giving a brief overview on that committee?
Yeah, so the negotiations committee, so we have three unions that we negotiate with. There's the MREA, which is the teachers. And then we have getting the acronyms, but it's kind of the IA, like non-teachers who are unionized. Yeah. And then we have what is AFSCME, which is kind of
Custodial. and
custodial,
administrative, like front office.
and front
admin.
office, yeah. That we negotiate with periodically, and it's usually, every 1 to 2 years. Obviously it's, it's the contract that, governs their workplace, and our relationship as a board, with them. So it's, it's a pretty big deal. It's everything from kind of, the the way the day looks, what their, pay structure is, et cetera. When negotiations are not happening, there is very little work to do. And when negotiations are happening, it can be a pretty intense committee to be on, both from a time perspective. And just quite honestly, it can be, depending on how the negotiation goes, emotionally tough. I mean, a lot of us have kids in the district. You can be sitting across the table from a teacher of your child, negotiating pretty heavily about things that are, important and sensitive to everyone at the table. So, so if you end up on that committee, just realize, that it could be, it's not the easiest work sometimes. And the meetings can be long, and if we don't agree, which is not certainly out of the question, it happens relatively often. It can end up, particularly with the teachers union, in negotiations, or not negotiations, but mediation. And that can literally be a 7-8 hour affair. So it's probably, it can be the toughest committee, and it can be absolutely nothing for a period of time.
Just so you know what you're getting yourself
Just
into.
say, yeah, no, it's the committee that people have had the strongest objections to serving on. And people have bailed on because it's intense. So I just want to make sure people. I know,
Yeah.
I'm selling it hard. But it's also one of, I think, the most important things for us.
Right. So why don't we go through the overviews of each committee, and then we'll see who's interested in joining which ones. So let's kick it to Tim for finance. And do you want to talk, Jake? I think this is a good time for the two of you. Do you wanted to talk about, this is one of the ideas, is to collapse the finance and facilities committees together. So why don't you share your thinking on that?
Well, we are thinking about that because, the things are pretty interrelated. And we get some more people to attend meetings. But, increasingly, like, we're making decisions about how much to contribute to the capital fund and, kind of strategic stuff like that. So we're thinking about combining them. Should I talk about the facilities committee right now?
Sure.
So facilities and energy is its own committee, where we talk about facilities, and we have been working with Angela Rosa, who's a facilities director, but he has retired. We just basically try to gather information as best we can about the state of the facility, reading the Truex report that's been done, and the state of the facility report, asking Andrew questions, and then reporting back to the board. So that's what facilities and energy does.
And finance, I think, has historically focused on reviewing the quarterly and annual financial statements and walking through those with our business manager. And lately, this past year, we've been, as Jake mentioned, kind of broadening and looking at sort of funding and utilization of our capital fund, and talking about budgeting in a little greater depth, I think, than maybe that committee has done in the past. And I think largely, again, as Jake mentioned, around the capital fund discussions there, and it was a suggestion that was initially brought to us by Libby that we consider maybe an operations committee that would bring the two together, so that we could have a broader sense of that particular conversation, but also it might be an appropriate workload for a single committee to have those two things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, at least in our last finance committee meeting, the three of us all felt like it was a good idea.
Yeah, it seems, if I remember correctly, when was the last time the facilities committee it had been several months, if I remember correctly, and so it seemed like. Yeah, in terms of workload, it would make sense to have a single operations committee that included the work of the facilities committee and planning.
So what you're suggesting is that they merge into one committee, not that there's this one committee and they are the standalone committees,
Just
just one. Uh-huh.
have the mission be operate. I think that was Libby's suggestion,
Yeah, I
right?
think
Operations.
Libby was the one who called it operations. And mentioned that their other boards have a single operations committee.
Oh.
So it seems like it makes sense. So I don't think we can take credit for it.
Yeah.
A great idea that someone else gave us.
Any questions?
Are there any reasons why we wouldn't want to combine the two into a single operations committee?
I might comment about the number of people. It feels nice to have a subcommittee of, what, like four or five members in it. Because then even if one person can't meet, still do it. And then there's kind of more ideas floating around. So that's something. When we were on facilities committee, we had three people and then one person resigned. And so it's just Lynn and I. And it would have been better with more people. So I don't know, 4 sounds like a good number.
If I remember correctly, not related to that committee, but when I joined, there was some discussion around like, if there are 4 members of the committee, you have to have 3 out of the 4 there for a quorum. But if there are 3 members of the committee, a quorum is achieved with only 2 out of the 3.
Yep.
And so it seemed like either 3 or 6 were optimal.
Or 5.
Yeah, or 5, but
I mean, you need 5.
You need 3.
you 3.
But then don't you have a quorum of the board? With 5?
Oh, 5 people?
That's 60%.
Yeah. I don't know how we've gotten, I think there have been committees that have had 5 people on them and have, I don't know how that has worked.
I mean, it's still a public meeting, but I think, subcommittee can't take action, they can make a meeting longer point. And then that's still okay. If they're all probably more than.
Possibly in there. Well, let's right now, before we get into the number of people on the committee, see if there's any. Scott had the question of like, is there any reason to keep them separate? Is there anything that an operations committee would not have a purview over that we would still need, say, a facilities committee for? I can't think of anything because I can imagine how that committee could still, an operations committee could still, provide thought partnership or, bounce ideas off of with the new facilities director, for example, which is one of the things that I remember Angela Rosa saying was valuable in joining the facilities committee to do things like that. But I can't see why an operations committee couldn't do that. Okay.
Is that something that we need to like make a motion to get rid of the other committees and then create?
Probably. Yeah.
So I would then move to dissolve the facilities and energy committee as well as the finance committee and create create an operations committee.
Is there a second? Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
All right.
Aye. Any opposed? Great. So then we have the policy committee. Jill, can you share a little bit of an overview?
So, so as a district and a board, we have a set number of required policies. Some are federal, some are state, some are optional or chosen or recommended. There's quite a long list of them on our website. And so the policy committee, we still are sort of gelling, but essentially revisit those policies on a regular basis to either amend them or reaffirm them or in some cases retire them. Sometimes items come up like changes to federal or state policy, or something might come up in public comment or in the board discussions that need to revisit a particular policy. So we meet once a month. I think we've sort of booked them out for the year now because it's tough to find time because we're all really good to review the policies. And so then we can sort of work together to form a draft. We typically work with Libby and whomever in her leadership team that's sort of associated with that policy, whether it's special education or technology, whatever. To then bring before the larger board, and then they typically go through multiple meetings so that we have chances to actually bring them through the formal agenda for people to review and respond to. We have one right now that's related to Title I, which is a federal funding component that requires a certain level of family and community engagement. And so those are actually, if they haven't already, they're going before the caregivers councils with Libby and her leadership team to sort of help share those with that group. So that's the policy. Everything from absenteeism or dissection in schools or smoking. There's lots of things related to student health, wellness, policy procedures. And a lot of them have strong model policies from the Vermont School Boards Association. That is a good resource. And I think we've actually voted at the last meeting to have the School Boards Association help us review our policy and sort of show us where it might be. Makes sense.
Great. Any questions about the policy committee? Okay, I'll share a little bit about the equity committee, and the current members of the committee, Lynn, Scott, and myself are proposing that this be the equity and engagement committee. So I'll say a little bit more about that. And then I'm also happy for Lynn and Scott if you want to chime in. So the equity committee started 4 years ago, and we've done a number of things to try to operationalize within board work the intentions of the DEI policy that we have. So one thing that we've done is create a policy creation or review tool that it through an equity lens. One thing we would like to be able to do is take that tool and actually scale it so that it can be useful for other kinds of decisions the board makes. But I mean, that's one of our on our to-do list. We have many items on our to-do list. We have had over the past most of last year, the equity committee took on that third priority that the board had set, but didn't have the indicators of success around community engagement and communication. And through doing that work, the question has often come up. I mean, I've been on the board for about 4.5 years now, and it's often come up, should we have a communications committee? And one of the things that's kept us from doing that is that we already have a lot of committees and we already have board members who are pretty stretched. And so we on the equity committee thought, well, this is actually a pretty nice dovetailing of equity and engagement together. So thoughts that we have of how to hold that work as a committee is, as we go throughout the year on any sort of equity initiatives that we would want to take on, we would make sure that there's an engagement component to those things. So that's one example. And then another is the equity committee could also be the ones that are the committee that's sort of project managing the different engagement work that the board would be taking on now that we have these indicators of success. So community forums, and Anna's already done a lot of has laid out in a plan, like all the different things that we would track. So we could work with Anna on keeping track of the different communication streams that we have and how many people they're reaching and how we're doing at that. So that would be another kind of piece of work that the committee would do. What else? What else did we talk about at our last meeting? When, as far as potential work of the committee?
Yeah. For me, the community engagement really means the broader community, because I think it when I first got on the board, it seemed like it was more the school community, and I think it's really important that we bring in everybody else to support for what's going on here. And I think the tool that Anna developed will really help determine whether we're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add is Mia mentioned that over the last couple of years, there have been several times when folks have brought up the idea of creating like a communications or engagement or communications engagement. And I think I was one of the ones sort of instigating for the creation of that committee. And over the last year in serving with Mia and Lynn on the equity committee, it felt right to me for that to be a single equity and engagement committee and not the creation of a separate.
Any questions or objections?
Where's the equity tool there?
That's a good, I mean, it's a Google Doc right now. I know other iterations of the policy committee, maybe we use it. I remember Emma, when she was on the board, talking about them using it each time they did a review of policies. But that's a great question. I don't know if or where it lives on our website. But I can find it in my Google Doc. Yep. Yes. Okay, well then we've got the Equity and Engagement Committee. We currently did not, in this past year, have anyone staffing the Net Zero Ad Hoc Committee. So I don't know if there's anyone who would be able to give a little overview of that.
We still have money now from the zero.
We do either $40,000 or $50,000 is set aside for a possible someday net zero study. And the Net Zero Ad Hoc Committee, I believe, created a definition or a vision of what we're going for, but I think that might be as far as they got. And then we did not have I guess board capacity or interest to staff it last year.
I think you're, I think Kristen was trying to with a group of sort of community members.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they ever had a meeting. But yeah, a lot they got sort of swallowed up by other major school district stuff.
Yeah.
And also a lot of uncertainty about the buildings. And available money. So yeah, never really got off the ground.
Feels like it would make sense to roll that into the now operations with buildings and to the extent it's still something folks are interested in. It seems like it might make sense to roll that into the operations unless there's a specific thing that's doing that's beyond like what the buildings and others would do.
So in the, not what we're looking at up here, but in the document that was linked from our agenda,
Packet,
the Net Zero Ad Hoc Committee is actually indented. I thought that meant it was actually a subcommittee of facilities and energy.
I think it was at one point. That's where it was
And-
created out of. Yes.
Yeah, so there is no longer a facilities and energy committee. So we could, if we want, it could become a subcommittee of the operations committee, like what Tim was just mentioning, but right now, doesn't seem like it exists
Right.
unless we wanted to.
And I think it would be a question for that committee, the operations committee, to determine if it's one of the priority issues to take, for the committee to take on, and if so, does it need a subcommittee, or would it just be the operations committee that takes it on?
The corollary is, do we keep carrying the money for it too?
Mhm.
Like
Right.
that was a question that came up in our finance committee meeting, if it's not. It's fine.
Right. And whenever the operations committee takes up that question, I think it would be helpful to have someone, it might even be Miriam might be a great person for this. I don't need to volunteer her when she's not at a meeting, but I know one of the reasons that we got to the point of prioritizing it and creating this subcommittee for it is that there was a lot of students advocacy coming to us around getting to the point where our district would be aiming for, if not ultimately getting to being fully net zero. And so I don't want to just like, because of, you know, the various different crises that have come our way, totally forget it. I would want there to be like a real conversation about where does it balance with our current priorities, including that amazing student advocacy that we had to get it going in the first place. But we don't have to do that tonight. I just am flagging that for when the operations can put that up. But for now, I think I will do something like. Okay. Then moving on to, whoops. The Superintendent Evaluation Committee. This is the committee that runs the process to evaluate the superintendent, which is one of the main functions of the board, is hiring and oversight of the superintendent. We have just a couple of meetings ago voted to retain the support and services of the SBA to help us facilitate that. But as we said in that meeting, we still think there's value in having the committee, because the committee can be the one that manages the consultant or the folks at the SBA and does the like connection between the board and them. And there will still be one thing that is not part of their services that we want to maintain doing, and we need to contractually, actually, it's in our contract with the teachers, is the climate survey. And that's where that lives. The staff climate survey lives with the superintendent evaluation committee. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention on the equity and engagement committee is that currently we meet every other Wednesday, essentially on the alternating Wednesdays from when the board meets, with a different committee makeup, or even with the same committee makeup, we can come up with a different schedule, but that's what we've been doing so far. And the superintendent evaluation committee meeting cadence is a little bit more regular, and this is happening, which is like going to be like April, May, and June. Although now that we have the SBA doing a lot of the facilitation, that we may be able to not meet with the same kind of frequency as we were in the last few years. And then over the course of the year, it's spread out more and includes things like checking in with Libby halfway through the year to just see how things are, the progress she's having on her goals and things like that. So it's not the same with the same kind of regularity as like once a month or once every other week. It's a little bit more based on what work needs to be done as far as the cadence of those. Any questions? Okay, well then let's go on down the line, and just to like get the names, just to see where things kind of shake out. I think we just start at one end of the table and move to the other and say, everybody say which committees they're interested in serving on, and then we'll see by the time we get to the end of the table if we've got a pretty good spread or if there's some shuffling around we need to do. Go for it, Tim.
I'm interested in staying on the policy superintendent evaluation and the now operations committees.
Okay. Scott, how about you?
So I am on the equity and now equity and engagement committee and I was on the finance, which is now operations, and also the MRPS board rep on CBCC. And that also comes with the committee assignment. So can you like pencil me in on operations and equity and engagement and with the understanding that I'd be happy to potentially give one of those up. Grace would be as well.
I'm on operations now, and I'd like to continue that, and maybe also, superintendent.
Brett.
I'm good with the policy committee and the negotiations committee, and I'm waiting to hear how the equity and engagement committee shakes out, because I have some interest, but I'm happy with two. So
Yeah.
could potentially have a third, but I'm happy to see how it shakes out.
Okay, great, thanks. And for myself, I'm interested in staying on the committees that I'm currently on, which are equity and engagement and superintendent evaluation. Jim.
I'm happy to stay on the committees I'm on, which are policy negotiations and superintendent eval. And I'd also be happy to step off one of those. Well, and our numbers shake out.
Oh, just wrote negotiations instead of your name. It's fine. Eval. Right, Jill.
I'm currently on negotiations and policy, and I'm happy to staying on those.
Fine. Oh boy.
Big choice. I feel pretty flexible in terms of what I'm willing to do for sure, but the ones that are most interesting to me right now would be the operations and equity and engagement.
All right.
You
Lynn.
I'm currently on negotiations and I'll stay there, and equity engagement, I'll stay there. And then, I was on facilities, but, I think I would be interested in the superintendent evaluation if you need any more people.
Okay.
Well, I will say, I've been, like I don't know if it's an official role or unofficial role as mentor with the student representatives. And I think I had a lapse in judgment, or I don't know what, but Amani, I don't know if we ever asked you if you wanted to be on a committee. Miriam was on the facilities committee. And so I think, yeah, I realized that today. I was like, oh my God. So I know that you won't be here much longer because you're gonna be going out to the left side of the country. But yeah, I do want to make sure that you at least are invited finally to join one or more of the committees. So I apologize and would love for you to join a committee if that was something that you were interested in. Again, I realize we're coming to the end of your tenure.
Yeah, I'm going to follow that. there's room on one for. You know, someone you can. Actually, someone you can happen.
Well, they can be determined by the members of the committee. They're not set in any form. Yeah, I would say you're welcome on any and all of them. I don't think negotiations would be exactly the right spot, but other than negotiations, I would say you're absolutely welcome on any and all of them. And also, we understand that even more so than us elected board members, you are most definitely volunteering your time. And so I would say more up to your desire and capacity than anything.
I don't know what's next year. But that.
Well, it sounds like that the operations committee is going to decide either way. And that reminds me, you can always, you don't have to like formally join a committee. You can always, you get all of the agendas in your email, right? So you can always go, oh, looks like operations is talking about net zero. I'm going to show up for that meeting. You don't have to officially be on the committee to do that too. All right, we'll leave it at that for now. Awesome. So then looking at this, I would say, other than the fact that the ones that we have where there are 4 people, there is the possibility of not having quorum if there's 2 people who can't make it, but I don't know, there's something about like, oh yeah, these committees look like kind of robust now instead of just like, oh, just barely 3 people, just barely hanging on. I don't know. What were you gonna say, Tim? Did you find it?
Well, no, I didn't, but is there like a statutory requirement that that a majority is a quorum for a committee? Because if not, I think we can set quorum numbers.
Oh, really?
Jim, can we set the quorum for the committee?
I don't know.
Because if we can, then the 4 would seem to make sense that we could set a quorum at 2.
And we would say the quorum is
And we could-
2. Why don't, I'm gonna write that down as a question we were gonna ask Petra.
You can be my vice
I'll
parliamentarian now.
consider.
Oh, there's my guy.
Yeah, I was just reading online. With the thing.
I mean, my suspicion is there would be, because otherwise you could have a situation where 7 people on the committee and 2 show up and they take
And it's
action.
50%, so it seems like it's not abusive or anything. And none of these committees are taking real action outside the board. So I don't know. It feels like the spirit is there with something like this.
And then the other question we have is, if we have 5 on a committee, are we in danger of being a quorum of the board?
Of the full board.
If all 5 are at a meeting? I think that one is actually named somewhere in open meeting law. I just can't remember what it says.
I'm seeing a majority.
The act of a majority of the board present at the meeting shall be treated as the act of the board. And so if a committee is not taking action, then it doesn't matter. It's a warned meeting. And I'm reading from the statute.
Open meeting law?
Municipal, not open meeting law, no,
Oh.
municipal and county government. Chapter 33,
Got it.
municipal officers.
Okay. So what, Is there anyone now that you're looking at that and you're going, oh, this looks like really strong coverage? Is there anyone, particularly I'm looking at folks who are on three committees? Is there anything where you're like, oh, maybe I could back off? And not feel too stretched? Just wanted to make enough before we nominate everybody to these kind of officially. I just wanted to make that give that opportunity. Folks.
And the negotiation with them, it's like a lot, but because of three negotiations happening.
Yeah. Do you think we need more?
Not necessarily, but I realize, I'm like, gosh, Lynn and I don't go the same way.
Right, right. That's a very good point.
Well, and it can be off years, too. I mean, sometimes you negotiate every year, but not with the same.
Will we negotiate all three contracts next year?
Because I think for the MRA. Let's say I'm going to put on your contract this year. The next year is gonna be there.
So what that would mean then is these four people would need to be spread out over three mini negotiation committees. Right?
No.
You did.
Really?
Yeah. I'm gonna put you in bold.
I only do. Well, but I know, but if there are three different negotiations in 1 year, then I don't know, some variation of two would need to go with the custodial and administrative. So
To the
maybe
buy-ins to it, yeah.
there, you know, like I might have to be with the IAs and the administrative. Or something, I don't know how it will work. We might want to raise a flag and say, hey, group, is anyone going to join?
Come back to the
this
board.
negotiations committee? Because we're looking at a really big forecast this last through.
Okay. That's not a bad idea. You'll know more in the fall, right? When those start. Unless there's someone who wants to jump in right now, given how compelling, the compelling pitch Jim made earlier. Okay, and I'm not hearing anybody who's volunteered for three committees say they want to back off.
Can I-
Okay, go for it, Scott.
I can decide later, right? Like in a month or two, be like.
Absolutely. Absolutely, we would just put it on the agenda and say,
Mhm.
we're asking, or Scott is asking to step down.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Cause I'm being indecisive, but I apologize.
We have a lot, when you said you're on subcommittees at the current center as well,
Yeah,
having been there.
it's important, that's a very important thing to think about.
I just can't figure out which one to.
For the pick. I get it. Yeah. Okay, so is there a motion to make committee assignments as laid out in the 2025-2026 MRPAS board committee assignments document?
I would take your place on the activity and engagement committee.
So
Wow, that was quick. I mean, after some.
yeah, there was something about the asymmetry that was like, I didn't want to leave one committee with only three, so thank you, Red.
Red, you are now on three. No, right? Okay. So now do we have a motion for committee assignments as laid out in the document?
I will move.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any discussion? If you don't want to- Look what you want to do.
I recall that the meeting time for that committee were like 8:30 on a Tuesday morning.
The equity
Yeah,
and engagement,
yeah.
that, right now, they're 8:15 on Wednesday morning.
Wednesday.
However, that can change.
7:15 or something like that, or I don't know. Are they,
7:15.
well, it's before, it's really tough, like the middle of the work days are.
Yeah.
Just,
Is 8:15 the middle of your workday?
no, but, well, it's,
It has to be
if
done.
I have trained, if I have, there are certain things that I
Yeah.
can't. I can do things from 7 to 8, but a lot of training that I do starts at 8. And it's in person,
Yep.
so it's, I've got.
I guess this brings up a question about any of the committee meetings, right? The decision on when to meet is based on the members of the committee, right? So it doesn't have to be a specific time.
Right. Yeah, that would probably be the first order of business, I would say, to anybody who's, you know, in sort of a chair position in those committees. I say that it's like, it's very loose, that role, but it is very helpful to have somebody who is the, like, setting agendas and making sure that the meetings happen. I would say, you know, between now and Friday, send out an email to all these people and say, okay, let's get a time on the calendar that works for folks. Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, excellent. Congratulations, everyone, and thank you. So actually, I probably just need to keep sharing my screen, but let me double check. I think the next order of business is, yes, the update to the board on the conversation that happened with our colleagues at Wash Central. And I'm actually going to kick it to you, Jim, to give us a little overview of it. And then we can share this document of the possibility for a merger feasibility study.
Yeah, so I think everyone is aware there's a lot of, well, you know, kind of historically, there have been a lot of community-wide discussions about merging with our neighbors in Wash Central. They've really been going on for like longer than most of us have been alive. And in fact, we dug into the history a little of it, and we used to actually be one district.
Back in the
And
middle of the last century.
yes, like in the middle of the last century. And there was a dispute over a bond that went down. The long and the short of it is Montpelier left and then decided they wanted to come back, and our neighboring town said no. And that,
Thanks so much.
yes.
That all happened in 1969.
Yeah, in 1969. And then there was a serious attempt to look at it in the late 80s that decided that it was about the right thing at the right time. But with, I think, some changing circumstances, both in terms of our facilities needs, student enrollment in both districts. Our enrollment is steady. They have declining enrollment. We have a high school that we have found out is located in a challenging position to really create further investments in. And then also we have a state political climate right now where a lot is up in the air. But one thing that does seem to be becoming clearer and clearer is that it is very likely there is going to be some sort of push towards larger districts statewide. You know, we've talked about this on the board for a while, kind of given these challenges. Libby and I and Mia have had some conversations that we've been discussing with Flora, the chair of the Wash Central Board, and the previous superintendent, Stephen, his name, Dellinger Page.
He's the current.
Yes, the current superintendent. and with the former superintendent, about possible merger. And we met again recently, and I think, honestly, I think there was some question with the state pushing for merger, whether it might just be good to sit back and see how that process plays out. We talked about it, and our consensus coming out of the meeting was, no, it probably makes sense to actually explore it, both because the legislature can be moving slowly, and a feeling that it's the right thing to do to explore it. It makes a lot of sense. And if we start the process, we may just be in a better position to have some of the homework done and kind of be in control of our destiny, even if the state comes in and works it anyways. And I think it's just a better process to get started if the community are willing to do it. So rather than rush right to kind of forming some sort of a committee, I think it was Floor who came up with the very smart idea of commissioning a feasibility study first, that we'd hope to have accomplished in the next 2 to 3 months. Libby has, I think, a couple people in mind who might be able to, willing and able to do it, but we would, put out a request for proposals and see, who is interested. But the idea would be to do a feasibility study that would answer some of kind of just the basic questions that we'd want to go into any process. What our facilities are, an inventory of facilities, some kind of basic questions about what the legal process is, questions that might be easy to answer about potential configuration or tax rates, those type of questions, so that way we wouldn't, if we do go into the process, we'll have a pile of good information, so we're not asking questions like, how many people could we put in to U32 high school? Like, could we merge? Yeah, could we merge, physically? And get that study back, have both boards take a look at it, and then decide next steps in terms of, do we want to use that study and put a committee together. And also by then we might be at the end of the legislative session and have a little more clarity on what, if anything, the legislature does. So that's where we're at. So, yeah, I'm happy to take questions.
You're gonna set some how much it might cost.
We were thinking just for this, because it would be only research. This would not be the facilitation of
A process.
a process yet, somewhere around $4,000 to $5,000 that we would share the cost of with Wash Central.
Okay. I mean, I think the Montpelier community is super curious about it. So from that angle, it makes sense to get going. I think there's the probability of the legislature forcing mergers, like not elective mergers like Act 46, but forced mergers,
Right.
is very high.
Yeah.
And we might not know though till the end of the biennium. Like it might take them 2 years to figure
Like
out what
next
they're
year.
gonna do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like the end of this year, you might have a sense of it, but we wouldn't know for sure. But I think by the end of next year, very likely. So that would make, that they wouldn't force Montpelier with Wash Central. They would force like a lot of Washington County together or something like that.
Yeah, there's a high possibility of that.
Makes sense to do this study ourselves. I ask because in sort of listening to the conversation statewide, there's a lot of talk about like what an optimum sized district is. And so if we're just looking at us in Wash Central, that's sort of making a decision before we're starting to say, like, this is the size we're looking for. And so curious if, the cost sounds reasonable. And I think in all likelihood, this is a very reasonable partner if we were to merge, but there may be others too, or there may be other configurations. And so I guess, is there value in having Because that question wouldn't seem to be answered by this. It would just seem to sort of take for granted that it's just Wash Central. And so, I guess I just throw it out there. Does it make sense to just have like a focus on Wash Central, but also have, if we're doing the study on our own, then maybe we can also ask, like, is there a better configuration that might have a better pedagogical outcome because of the sizing or whatever?
One of the things we'd be asking the consultant to do is including other districts.
Oh.
It's the very last bullet. It's not exact, I don't think it is exactly what you were just saying. It's not like we're saying, tell us, which we could add to this actually, because this is a draft. You can make it changes in how we're asking. What I hear you asking is like, tell us the different configurations you could see in the central Vermont area, which is not exactly this, but it's similar to what you were just saying, which is, yes, I think you're right, that by doing this with Wash Central, the presumption is that we're partnering with them in this process, whether it's certainly not a decision to merge, of course, but it is a partnering them to get this process started. But it is also, we do want to know, does it make sense to include Twinfield in this conversation? Does it make sense to include Barry in this conversation? Does it make sense to include Harwood? We would want the consultant to answer those questions. And that's what we're asking in that very last point at the bottom.
We asked them like, what are the best, how can our district prepare for potential forced merger? Like, what kind of decisions should we make, regarding debt, fund balance, contracts, other things like that would be strategic.
Yeah, and I think this makes sense from another perspective. And it's because I have a slightly cynical nature. I am less certain that there will be a forced merger because I think it's politically hard. And I'm not sure Scott is running again. And I think as the clock kicks down and the food fight that's going to come over the actual, getting to the ground on forcing merger and what that's going to mean politically, I think it could be easy for the legislators to run out the clock on that, or put forward some sort of financial fix that squeezes districts and kind of makes districts do the messy work of putting together neighbors, because that might be easier and it might shift the work, which is kind of what Act 46 did. And I think if something like that happened, I think we're in a better position if we're looking at some strategic ways that we can merge, and we're not just waiting for the legislature to tell us how to do it, when they might just put more financial burdens on us and let us figure it out ourselves. I think it's good to get ahead of the game. And I also think that if there is a forced merger, if we are starting to look strategically, and Mia's absolutely right, looking at things like Plainfield and Twinfield, those very make sense. Getting some of those pieces in place, so some of those decisions maybe are already falling into place, and it's easier for us to absorb into a larger district than if we're, who knows how that could look if there's no momentum going.
Jill.
I just want to thank you guys very much and for having that conversation, because I do think we need to be having it. I think this is a very good, thorough, inclusive list. My two suggestions, I guess, is to make sure that we include the Central Vermont Career Center, because we also did some sort of a feasibility, right? Some of these same sort of questions and thought processes were done for the Career Center. And I do think it'd be kind of a missed opportunity if we're thinking about our district as a larger whole for the next 30 years, then there could be some really cool stuff we could do as sort of like a comprehensive high school or something like that. And then the other piece is just, I'm wondering if it's like, if this breadth of very good questions is reasonable for like one entity to do, right? There's a difference between like student outcomes and student opportunities and that feasibility versus like literally like the buildings and the debt services and things like that. So I'm wondering if like there is like a unicorn consultant who could do all of these things, or it might have to be kind of broken up or narrowed down, especially if we want it by June. But I think they're all really good to have captured in one place. I'm just not sure if entities that do feasibility studies, and maybe I'm wrong, if I'm wrong, could cover that breadth of question.
Yeah, they have to be pretty special.
So I'm wondering, there seems to be some overlap with what I understood, like ultimately, if the committee was to be formed to look at this, right, by each of the, like, U32 or Wash Central has to vote to form the committee, right, and Montpelier has to vote to form the committee, and then so I was on a committee when I was on OSSU's board for Orange, South, whatever OSSU stands for, Roxbury, sorry, Randolph, Braintree, and Brookfield looked into merging before Act 46. And we went through the whole process, and a lot of what is in this was what the committee did.
Right.
And so it seems like there's a feasibility study that is going to gather information that the committee also would be tasked with doing. And so I'm wondering, like, I like the idea of gathering some basic information to decide whether or not to form the committee.
Right.
But it seems like that feasibility study is in this document way more comprehensive than what I would imagine would happen before a committee is even formed. And I'm rambling, but I'm not really exactly sure. There's like this blurring going on between what the role of the committee would be versus what a feasibility study would get.
Yeah, I think we were just thinking it would be helpful to give the committee a jumping off point, and then they could take it from there, either deeper questions on any of these things, and definitely do the community engagement piece, which is completely missing from this on purpose, because that is a much more robust process. That was just the initial thinking. And then just as a reminder, as I put in the email, we're not asking to make a decision on this tonight. I think we gave this to you with too short notice to be able to do that, but this is really helpful feedback or questions for us to bring back to Laura and Stephen. They are doing the same thing where they're putting it in front of the Wash Central board next Wednesday, and then also hoping to do a vote on it on the 19th, just like we would hope to vote on it either way on the 19th. So these questions will inform maybe some changes, or maybe they'll say, we're not worried about how robust it looks. We're going to try for the unicorn, or, whatever. Is there anyone who, Scott's raised a good point, there's another way to approach this, which would be to form the committee first. I personally think this makes sense to give the committee something to work with. And as somebody, maybe Tim said, there's been a lot of interest. We've heard a lot of interest in the Montpelier community, Montpelier and Roxbury. Mostly I've heard it in Montpelier. I don't know how much interest there is in Roxbury, but within our broader community, interest in this idea. And I think that interest is usually rooted in assumptions. Like, I think people automatically think our taxes will go down if we are a merged district. And we don't know, that could be the case, but we don't know for sure. And it would be very helpful, I think, for the committee to be able to work with some more solid information than just some of these like guesses that people have, or like, for sure, we'd be able to move all of the students from MHS into U32. I think that's the case. We're not really sure though. So if we had that kind of stuff, then the committee has more solid answers on things, on some of those main questions we've been working with. So in my opinion, it helps to have this report from a consultant for the committee to be able to work with, rather than a committee to form first and then get some of those answers.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of potential for just kind of number crunching that could be really valuable. And then maybe like some of these other things are more of like a phase two, talking about programming and, what, how student options might change, like, I don't know, maybe that's part of it, that a phase one, but like number crunching is pretty important, like what you said about the tax rate assumption, like, I think that the Montpelier community maybe would be surprised to find out that how it would play out in the long run. So that would be really good to have written out.
Yeah, and I definitely think, because I think you're right, Dave, that the tax savings might either not be there or not there in the way that people think it's going to be there. Which I think gets to the second level of consideration, does go to like class configuration, because then if there's not huge tax savings, there might be some other big benefits. For instance, we might be able to continue to offer the type of varied course offerings that I think are really valued at both high schools. If we have a class of, say, 375 instead of, or not 375, but closer to two, well, it would be around 200, closer to 200 than 100 each, in terms of keeping the AP classes, keeping some of the other some of the specials, some of the arts, some of the music. A lot of that might be more doable for the same price, which is a big benefit, or potentially a big benefit.
Any other questions or thoughts on what's in the draft here?
What does third space refer to?
I don't know, but the Wash Central team added that, so I had that same question. Do you know? It's on here, under comparison of student opportunities, it's one of the sub points, third space.
Is that like something that they offer? Maybe it's something that they have, like we have flexible pathways, they have
Possible.
something.
I mean, I've heard it referred to as like kind of a place of community gathering. Like got home first place, work second place, and then like a third place for you for like kind of community social gatherings.
Like a coffee shop.
Yeah.
It's comprehensive third space programming, community partnerships.
Oh, sounds like flexible pathways. So maybe they're, yeah, but I can ask. So here's what I've got from my notes. How to prepare for a forced merger. And I'm not sort of saying we're like cram all this back in there, but this is what I've been capturing from the conversation. Multiple configurations with other districts, which is a variation on what we're saying in the final point, as it's currently written. Consider Central Vermont Career Center. The question of is if it's possible to cover all of this in one study, or are we looking for a unicorn consultant that doesn't exist? And there is some overlap, the note that there's some overlap between what we're asking for in the feasibility study and what a committee would look at. Did I get everything? And what is the third space?
Point of structure, I'm just curious, are they reporting to both districts at the same time, or are we doing?
Oh, okay, yep.
Wow. Some of what I'm curious about is what it looks like for things like contract renegotiation. I'm sort of wondering if there's a summary that could include essentially what it would look like to scale up the whole thing. To get a sense of what it would look like if we were mashed together with Barry, Northfields, all these other great spaces, you know, all these other communities, districts. I don't know if that's what you're saying in the last bullet here, or,
What do you mean when you say what it would look like?
well, I mean, sure. These are the main obstacles that need to be overcome, merging Montpelier with, you know, the U32 district,
Mhm.
which I always forget the acronym. If you scaled up that process to include Berry Town, Berry City, all these different communities, how would that look? How might that look differently or the same? I guess. I'm not sure if that's a fair ask. But if we are, can we learn from this something about what it might look like if we're forced to do something by the legislature?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm kind of on the same page. It's like, you know, using this as like a case study as like, you know, how does our district prepare for merger generally? Like, what are the things we need to do to get ready, whether it's forced or whether it's encouraged, whether it's just with Washington Central or with it, if it's with other districts, like, you know, and you have some of them here, debt service and fund bonds, and then Brett mentioned the contracts. But I mean, I don't think they have to do a ton of number crunching on that because it's impossible to do that necessarily, but just give us some guidance on how to prepare.
Okay.
I think those sentiments are kind of where I was trying to get at with the. If we study it, the joint version just ours.
I mean, Watch Central would maybe carry some of that stuff.
And I think there's overlap, but it's good to have someone kind of advise us from the start rather than down the path.
I'm also wondering, like, can we get a sense of how we will want to approach trying to communicate all this to our communities, because it's really hard to communicate with the community. There's a lot of like assumptions that are like, oh, so obvious that, you know, you should just do this and do that. And like, how many, like what needs to happen to say, I don't know, turn a building into public housing instead of, you know, like what are some of the actual considerations that need to occur that the community doesn't necessarily take into account when they make sort of broad, you know, sort of statements about what we should do, and it's obvious to them. I'm not sure how to put that, but
Well, I think it could go under. I think the thing you're asking for, Rhett, I think, is any advice a consultant would have on how to talk about this within our communities. And maybe that can go under the analysis of high level pros cons of a merger. Might get wrapped in there. And if they have just like top lines, I think that is starting to move us more in the direction of committee work and engage in the community. But if there was something that they could provide in terms of just how to talk about it, or, you know, what to highlight, or what, what kind of transparency measures, for sure.
what parts would be very prolonged as opposed to just simple.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Mhm.
I mean, I remember, again, when I was in Randolph, we had Steve Costello as a consultant and for like several months of community forums in other towns, and that's a lot of what you were describing, Brett, was yeah, accomplished through the work of the committee who have brought in this consultant, not the districts. I mean, the committees are made up of the districts, but they were separate representatives from the board as well as community members who were the ones that were asking the questions, not just the individual board.
Any thoughts or questions for tonight? All right. Thanks, everybody. So just as a reminder, so what I'll do is share this update as far as like what we talked about with Laura and Stephen, and we'll see what the conversation at their board meeting looks like at the, next week. And then we'll look at this again in a couple weeks.
Good.
All right.
There's one more thing that I probably should have put on the agenda, but town meeting in Roxbury occurred, and the question of whether the town would prefer to receive the building. It was a non-binding question. That was one of the items in our agenda, I guess you could call it. And of the people that were in the room, there was overwhelming support for receiving the building. There was discussion about PCBs, and it was pointed out that if there is renewed funding from the state, it wouldn't include Roxbury Village School because it's no longer a school. So I don't know what that means for the select board. I feel like they had some questions about that possibility. And there was a paper ballot in the room about the possibility of selling it immediately, of consolidating the rest of the buildings in town, or of just trying to lease space and maintaining the rest of the buildings in town as they are. And that I think one person voted to sell it immediately, 17 said consolidate all the buildings, and 56 said keep the buildings as they are and lease the space. All of that's non-binding, but there's also a community engagement process happening in Roxbury right now that's fairly robust. I forget the name of the what is the Vermont Rural? Yeah, so they're facilitating
Oh, the
this.
Council on Rural Development or different? Different, okay.
But that's the news from town meeting.
Oh, good, thank you.
So I don't know what that means for the select board's ultimate decision, but
Right. And I think we said they have until the 4th of April or something like that.
yeah, they discussed the possibility of hinging that notification on the results of PCB testing, but that seems like a challenging possibility if there's no funding for PCB testing.
Right.
There was a lot of discussion. What the select board's response to this board would be, and how that may find like purchasing sale agreement and the timeframes associated with that. So I honestly didn't come away with a good sense of what the select board's direction was going to be for those different components, but I think we should be hearing soon from the select board.
Okay. Great. Thanks for that update.
Wow.
And then Tim, you had an update from the policy committee?
Yeah, this is my error in talking with the gentleman from VSBA. We crossed wires on the cost of the policy review that we brought last week. It was my understanding based on our conversation that the $1,000 fee covered our required and recommended policies. And when I followed up with him to indicate we wanted to move forward, he said, no, it's the $1,000 for the required and $1,000 for the recommended, for a total of $2,000. We haven't, I think our policy committee is going to meet next week. So I just wanted to bring the error up to you. I apologize for that miscommunication and presume, Jill, we probably talk about it at policy committee and then come back, but I just felt like I should flag the error. Apologies for it.
Thanks. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of our agenda. Double check just to make sure. Yep. Is there a motion to adjourn? Jim, do I make a motion?
Yeah.
Is there a second? Great. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? All right. Thanks, everybody.